moving forward with a completely different letter. Let's start with the letter N, part 1, our 10 words for today. Let's read these out together so we have an idea of how to pronounce them. Normative, Narcissist, Non-Conformist, Nemesis, Nepotism, Naivety, Nihilism, Nexus, Nirvana, Nuance. Now, these 10 words have a lot of history behind them, and I'm going to be going through them, giving you guys a little bit of a breakdown as to how these words came about, and hopefully this will help you guys remember them a little bit more, especially when you are trying to use them in your essays, which I absolutely hope you guys do. So let's just keep that in mind as we move forward with our first word, normative. This is an adjective of, relating to, or determining norms or standards, conforming to or based on norms. So as you can see, there are two definitions, of course, split by the semicolon, and we have one word mentioned both times, this idea of a norm. Now, if you guys are unfamiliar with a norm, don't worry, I got you, okay? Norms are simply standards or some kind of idea that is consistent throughout everything, pretty much. There is a norm stating that in Korea, we need to take off our shoes when we go into somebody's house. It's a standard, it's a norm, it's normal for us, right? If we think about it that way, it's easier to remember. So, with that in mind, what is normative? It is determining these norms, or perhaps conforming to or based on these norms. Synonyms are standardizing, prescriptive, rational, regulating, and controlling. The two that I want you guys to use the most if you guys are going to be using the synonyms are standardizing and regulating. Normative tests should not be the major basis for developmental assessment. Here we're stating that these tests that serve as standardized tests, right? This can be anything from the AP test to the SAT, to the TOEFL, TOEIC, TOPIC, anything of those kinds of natures. This is saying that normative tests, standardized tests, tests that determine some kind of norm or average or standard should not be the major basis for developmental assessment. It's important, but it shouldn't be the only thing that factors into what kind of person you are. And so with this being in mind, we're trying to say normative, sticking with or kind of determining the average or what is normal, the standard in a society. Despite her brassy attitude, the film obeys the most of the normative rules in its genre. So she might be a little bit brassy, she might be a little bit crude, but overall the film is able to stick with the standard rules of the genre that it is made in, okay? The rules are normative and their validity is thus unaffected by issues of fact. Sentence, you don't really have to pay too much attention to it. What are we staring at though? The rules are normative. They are determining the standard. They are allowing you to adhere or stick with the norms, okay, the standards. Again, norms. The normative dilemma, should they stay at home or not after the child was born? The regular same old question that everybody hears, that is normal for everybody to go through, should they stay at home or should they go outside? That is the question. Normative, again, something that is very standard, very average, something that comes up a lot. Then we have the word narcissist. This is a noun, an individual showing an extremely self-centered person who has an exaggerated sense of self-importance. So here, with this idea of the narcissist, I want us to just take a pause real quick. This is another word from Greek mythology. I will never run out of references to Greek mythology, so I'm sorry to disappoint. But narcissism and narcissist actually came from a man named Narcissus, okay? This is actually a man's name, Narcissus, and he was, of course, cursed to be super beautiful, and he was very gorgeous, and he ended up being very mean to this one woodland spirit. Her name was Echo, and that's the exact same Echo you're thinking about. Yes, the echo, somebody calling back to you, that kind of echo. He, kind of ignored her, and he was cursed, and so he fell in love with himself. He was so in love with himself that he ends up drowning. And so it becomes a part of, that cruel twist of fate that, he was so self-centered, he was so in love with himself that it actually became his downfall. And so in contemporary English and also in English from the Middle Ages as well, you will see the word narcissus or narcissistic, narcissism come up quite often, meaning they think very highly of themselves, very egotistical. Therefore, synonyms we have vain, egotistical, conceited, braggart, self-absorbed, boastful, and self-infatuated. Egotistical. Ooh, this is one of those words I hope we just really use a lot. Conceited is very good as well. Boastful, talking a lot about who you are as a person and what kind of accomplishments you have. So that does have a little bit of a different nuance. And self-infatuated. Self-infatuated here, meaning you are in love with yourself, and to an extreme degree, in an obsessive way. He is a narcissist and a clown. Not probably a literal clown with a red nose and big shoes, but rather he makes a fool of himself and he's in love with himself. And so probably this person's not a nice person to hang out with. And so with the word narcissist, let's look at a few more sentences. The narcissistic teenager cannot walk more than 50 feet without checking her appearance. Here we're using the word narcissistic as an adjective. So I just wanted to show you guys how we can use the word narcissist here. Add the IC. And we get this adjective, meaning a person or a quality of being in love with oneself or being self-infatuated. This teenager is obsessed with the way they look, so they constantly have to be looking at themselves in a mirror. Even with wild schemes, the charismatic narcissist can whip up enormous enthusiasm. So the charismatic and narcissist, probably somebody, again, not necessarily a good person, thinks very highly of themselves, but they're charismatic as well. And we already talked about what charisma is, right? And so they're able to whip up enormous enthusiasm. What a fun sentence. This has a lot of things going on inside of it. We have whip up. We also have another alliteration here, all fun and dandy. Being a parent makes you less narcissistic. And here we have it again one last time as an adjective, narcissist plus narcissistic. Usually when we say the word narcissist, we just say it as a pointed fact. We don't make a large sentence about it usually. We just tend to say, oh, that person's a narcissist. And that's usually all we need to say for the person to understand what we're trying to get across. So usually we'll see it in a lot of different ways. Narcissism, narcissistic, narcissist. But here we're talking about the person, the noun, the narcissist. Then we have the word non-conformist. This is also a noun, a person who does not conform to a generally accepted pattern of thought or action. So it's a very straightforward kind of word. Look at this. We have the word non, meaning no, and then we have the word conform. Okay, conform meaning, of course, sticking with a rule. Probably the normative rules, remember? Okay, so we probably don't stick with the standard. We don't stick with any kind of fad. We are completely separate from everything else. We do not like to conform. A person who does that specifically is a non-conformist. Ist being here a kind of person, okay? A person who does not conform to a generally accepted pattern or thought of action can also be described as bohemian, heretic, iconoclast, deviant, individualist, loner, or maverick. Whoa, look at that, you guys. We have a word that we've seen before. This should not be something that we are confused by. Additionally, we have the word deviant. This means to deviate from something else. To deviate is to go off track. So we can also see it like this. We have the word individualist, talking about oneself, not in an egotistical way, like not putting yourself first, but standing apart. You can also use the word individualist. Loner, this usually kind of means that they don't have any friends, tends to be used in a negative way, and maverick as well. We don't really use the word maverick in academic English. We tend to use it in conversation. Favoring one can exclude non-conformists. So if you are favoring something, one thing, one idea, one concept, then you might be excluding non-conformists because maybe they don't like to conform to that simple idea. Again, if you're a non-conformist, you're pretty strict about it. You don't like to stick with the norm, the ideas, the general accepted patterns of behavior that everybody else might be conforming to. That's why the word bohemian is at the front of this list. They were nonconformists who chose to be arrested instead of obeying the laws. Really good example here. We're talking about obeying the laws instead of, okay? Nonconformists, we're not going to conform. What are we not conforming to? The law. We're not going to conform to the rules and regulations. He was a nonconformist in college, but now he wears a three-piece suit to work every day. Now this sentence needs a little bit more nuance and a little bit more, I would say, common sense, just reading it as a whole. He used to not conform to anything, but now he wears a three-piece suit to work every day. Now he conforms to society. He does his job at a 9 to 5, goes to work every day in a suit with a button up, and so now he's no longer, lashing out or trying to be different, standing out. He is one and the same as everybody else. The movie follows a teenager nonconformist who arrives in a small town in Arizona. This movie's following some kid who doesn't want to be labeled as the same as the, like the cliques or the popular girls, the popular boys, the jocks, whatever. This teenager doesn't want to be involved in any of that. They would much rather be on their own, and they see themselves as on their own. They don't conform to any kind of genre, any kind of, clique, grouping, anything like that. Then we have the word nemesis. This is a noun, a formidable and usually victorious rival or opponent, inflicts retribution or vengeance. Now, again, another Greek mythology reference, I'm so sorry, but Nemesis is the name of a minor god, and she is the god of retribution and vengeance, okay? So if you have been done wrong, then Nemesis will wait, not immediately, just give you a little bit of time, and she will allow the opportunity to arise where you can get back at somebody, or give you an opportunity to make things right again, make things equal. And Nemesis, for that reason, can be depicted with only one eye, because it's the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of metaphor that we see here, but what we want to talk about is this retribution idea, to get back at somebody. Therefore, synonyms are avenger, castigator, chastiser, punisher, scourge, or vigilante. Out of all of these, avenger is probably the best one. If you guys are familiar with Marvel movies, then this one should be a bit of a no-brainer. That explains why they're called the Avengers, because they are getting back at the fact that they have been beaten before. Batman is the Joker's main nemesis and always foils his wicked plots. Here, I'm going to just switch tracks and go to DC for a second, okay? Batman is the Joker's main nemesis, their main villain, the formidable rival that usually sometimes actually wins the fights. And so they go back and forth. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, and always foils his wicked plots. They go up against each other all the time. Again, though, we're talking about this in the Joker's perspective, right? The Joker's main nemesis is Batman. Batman, of course, wins. And so the word nemesis also has this connotation, this insistence that whoever your nemesis is has probably won before, okay? Has won against you. This is not the first time. But a broken right foot has been his real nemesis in his recent years. And so here, this right foot that's been broken, that's the true evil in his life, the true rival, the true opponent. But why is it a nemesis? Because it's won against him before. He wasn't able to walk before because of a broken right foot, and so now it still bothers him, and he considers it his nemesis because it still hurts. He will be playing his old nemesis for the championship. So they probably fought before, the other team probably won, but now they're playing again my old nemesis, the person or the team that I went up against last time that I wasn't able to beat. Kara was not happy when her nemesis won the contest. Again, the person has probably won the contest before, and Kara is again not very happy and sees them as a nemesis, their opponent, their main antagonist, or just simply an enemy who has won before. So with that being said, let's move on to the next one, which is the word nepotism. Nepotism is one of those words that I really enjoy, not because we tend to use it a lot. It's very specific, as you can see, but simply because it's an interesting word to use and to look at, and also when you see it in a book or a paper, the moment you see it, you know exactly what's going on. You don't need any explanation. It's one of those nice words. And so please make sure you memorize this one, because if it comes up, there's no real big word to use to replace it. Nepotism here is favoritism, as in appointment to a job based on kinship. And then let me just clarify here. Kinship meaning family, okay? It can be blood relation, yes, but it can also just be by marriage or some kind of familial relationship, okay? Family relationship is how we tend to see nepotism. Nepotism also does go from top down, so it would be like a dad going down and, saying, hey, to my son, you need to go up as well. And so this would be nepotism in, let's say, a business kind of situation. A father hiring their son instead of somebody else because, well, they favorite their child. They're a bit biased. For that reason, we have synonyms such as favoritism, bias, partiality, partisanship, patronage, and unfairness. If we're going to use any of them, I would say bias and favoritism are the ones we want to use, but bias is the one I personally like. Don't ask me why, I just personally like it. And the word bias tends to come up more often in academic writing than you might think. So please make sure we use that too. Cage changed his name to deflect accusations of nepotism. And so there's this person named Cage, this guy, and he wanted to change his name to get rid of these rumors about nepotism. Most likely he has a family member, a mother or a father, grandfather, grandmother, who gave them a lot of money or perhaps gave them a position or a job. Most likely a job, usually used as a job. And they did not want to be accused of being favorited by their family member. And so what did they do? They changed their name. That way, in the business, it would be hard to say, hey, aren't you the CEO's son? Well, you got this job because you're the son, right? That's nepotism for you. He wanted to avoid that, and that's why he changed his name. And so again, as that example just explained, if you know what the word nepotism is, you don't really need any other explanation. You know it for what it is, which is favoritism based on the fact that you're family. Since George always struggles, everyone knows his father hired him due to nepotism. Again, we're talking about this idea of jobs, right? Working. We know that George struggles, so his dad, his father and son, hired him due to this idea of favoritism within the family. Opponents accuse him of corruption and nepotism, corruption being, of course, being corrupt, doing the wrong thing, being perhaps bribed by money, and nepotism, wanting their family to be closer inside this business and putting their family first instead of people who are more capable or should be hired instead. I wondered why he had brought me into his business if he hated nepotism so much. This person, this girl, this guy, this person is probably thinking to themselves, why did my father hire me if he does not like nepotism? It will look like nepotism if they hire me. So again, favoritism based on the fact that you're family, that's what nepotism is. Remember the word, okay? There's no word that really sits in the same kind of seat as nepotism does. Bias is close, favoritism is close, but I can say I am biased to, vanilla ice cream over chocolate ice cream. That doesn't mean that I have some kind of nepotism. I don't have a familial relationship with them. And so remember, nepotism is, again, bias according to family relationships. Remember that. It's a very important word. Then we have the word naivety. This is a remark or action characterized by unaffected simplicity. Now, I want to clarify something before we move on. There's like 80 different spellings of this word, and I want to write them down for you because they're all correct. So we have this idea of naivety with an accent. We also have naivety with 2 dots over the I. We also have naivety, 2 dots, and the accent. And sometimes you also have with a Y. And you also have this same version with an I with a double dot. So what's the difference? They're all the same. You can use them pretty much for any kind of situation. They all work the exact same way. The only difference really is if you're using the French spelling or if you're using the more Americanized spelling. Here I have the more American spelling written out for us, but I will show us how we can use it in a different spelling as well. So synonyms here for remark or action characterized by unaffected simplicity would be artlessness, guilelessness, veridity, simplicity, innocence, greenness, or ingenuousness. So here we want to be focusing on this idea of simplicity and also the idea of innocence, okay? Mostly because, again, we're not going to be using these other words too often. We tend to use simplicity and innocence more. Also, I would say if you guys are feeling a little bit fresh, if you guys want to be a little bit lucky, the word greenness works great as well. If you're green to something or like the color, you're green, that usually means that you're brand new to it, you don't really know what's going on. Not that you're ignorant, that you're choosing to not be educated, but you just don't know. You're just kind of new to it all. And so for that reason, simplicity, innocence, and greenness are quite good. What bothers Jenkins is the most, more than his naivety, is the guilt. What bothers Jenkins the most, more than his naivety is the guilt. The fact that he is not aware, just simply unaware, not out of choice, but rather just perhaps the situation at hand. Something that annoys him more than that is the guilt. So the fact that he just simply doesn't know, his simplicity, his innocence, his greenness, the fact that, he's new to this entire situation, that's what bothers him. Streep is not exaggerating the naivety she brought to the project. So this person, whose last name is Streep, is not talking highly or talking extremely about the naivety that she brought into this project, meaning that she was being very truthful when she said, I don't know what's going on, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to work this. She was being very green and very honest. I like the naivety of children and living simply day to day, the simplicity, the normal day-to-day activities, the innocence as well. That's how we can read it here. And lastly, she was a manipulative woman, and in our naivety, we all saw her as a villain. And so here we see the word naivety used with a little bit of an accent, right? We have that accent there. The accent has to go this way, by the way. It's going to the right. So if we're going to be using the accent, we need to make sure it goes to the right. And also here, this is more closer to the French spelling or the French pronunciation. If you want to write it that way, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with it. If you want to do a double dot on the I, that works fine too. Go ahead, you do it. But just know that it really doesn't matter too much because it's all accepted in the dictionary. Then we have the word nihilism, and this is a viewpoint that traditional values and beliefs are unfounded and that existence is senseless and useless. We have a lot of interesting words today. I gotta be honest with you guys. Even when I was making this, I was like, ooh, these are some very interesting, very intriguing vocabulary words we're discussing. But anyway, the word nihilism, what we really just want to focus in on is that existence is senseless and useless. If you are nihilistic, or you have a nihilism, or if you're studying nihilism, you're studying something that talks about how senseless and useless life is. Very pessimistic for some people, sometimes very realistic for others as well. And so let's see how this can be changed into some synonyms. Repudiation, denial, skepticism, cynicism, pessimism, abnegation, or disbelief. I would say that the word cynicism tends to be used quite often, as well as the word pessimism. Denial and also disbelief, they work okay enough, but if we're going to be using the word nihilism, don't use those words. Use cynicism or pessimism instead, especially because these are the words that get thrown around the most alongside this one. Today, horror has tones of chaotic nihilism. So here, today, horror films, horror movies have tones of chaotic, senselessness, and uselessness, that there is nothing positive going on in life, that there's no meaning, lack of meaning. So how can we also see this? Maybe it's a bit cynical, maybe it's a bit pessimistic. We have no purpose on this planet, and that is what this idea of nihilism is, okay? The reason why I bring this up isn't because we're gonna be using it in our essays. Some people never have to use it in their essays ever, and that's fine, that's great. But the word nihilism does come up quite often in textbooks and in theories. We tend to see it quite often in literary works, and if somebody is very much like Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore, the donkey, I think, the one with the weird tail, he's considered a nihilist because he doesn't think there's any meaning to the world. He's very downtrodden all the time. And so if you meet somebody who doesn't really think that there's a purpose to the world, then you tend to call them a nihilist. And it's a very specific term that we see a lot in high school, and especially if you end up doing a lot of literary studies. Nihilism rejects any objective basis for society and its morality. Nihilism, again, there's no sense to the world, there's no use for any of this community or society, so it's rejecting all of that. Carl is a serious musician who missed out on the nihilism of the 70s punk genre. So 70s punk used to have a lot of nihilistic tendencies. There's no sense in the world, there's no sense in our community, there's no use for any of it, and that's kind of the message that 70s punk music used to have, and Carl, as a serious musician, ended up passing up on this genre when it was going on. I would see the nihilism and hopelessness of living and I would stop acting. They would see that there is no use in acting. They would see there's no sense in acting. It felt hopeless. So for that reason, they stopped acting and stopped going and trying to, make their living by doing this act. Again, having no sense, having no purpose, that would be considered nihilism. It's a belief, it's a way that you can be nihilistic, nihilist, all those things, very similar to narcissism, in that kind of way. Then we have the word nexus. This is a noun. The connection or connective point, we're talking about the moment when they are connected. Synonyms being not, consecution, catena, catenation, chain, progression, or concatenation. Now we see the word catena, catenation, and concatenation, these three words right here as like its own little bundle, interestingly. But I would say that the word chain for some reason would be the best one to use if we're going to be using the word nexus, okay? So we don't really have to use these words. They're kind of confusing. Even I find them confusing. Let's be real, we're not going to use them. Use the word chain instead. As the nexus for three great religions, Jerusalem has had a troubled as well as illustrious history. So as the main point, the connective point, the point that is, of course, let's say on some kind of like cube, let's say, for instance, or a triangle, this would be considered a nexus. If we're talking about, like a pyramid. That is where they connect. That would be considered the nexus. As the nexus, Jerusalem connects three different religions together. Therefore, we can call it, a nexus. The city itself, the area itself is a nexus. The park has been a nexus of out-of-control parties and unsanctioned boxing matches. And so here we have out-of-control parties as one factor, unsanctioned boxing matches as another factor, and they all happen where? In a park. What is that called, the park? A nexus. Why? Because it all happens in that connected area. It is a complex nexus of nerves at the base of your brain. Down here, we have a complex connection, chain of. We have a lot of different nerves that are connecting to and fro one another, and they are all called one entire complex nexus, where they connect. There is a nexus between each leading group of social phenomena with the next one. There is a chain, there is a continuation, there is a lead-on of connections from one to the next to the next. There are connective bits in between. And so nexus, again, is that little tie that combines one side with another side, the point where they meet. Here we have the word nirvana. This is a noun, a place or state of oblivion to care, pain, or external reality, or an unobtainable dream. We see this a lot in a lot of different kinds of religions as well. And this is also a very famous band. And so the word nirvana can be tossed around quite often, but we don't tend to use it just simply because we don't know what it means. But I got you. Synonyms are oblivion, enlightenment, tranquility, serenity, bliss, paradise, or heaven. Paradise would be the closest that I would say to nirvana. It's not necessarily always a physical place. It can be a state of being as well. Some kind of tranquility or serenity, that you're at calm, you're at peace with yourself, there's no pain, you're perfectly good the way you are, and you're happy, you're very pleased. That would be nirvana. There is soon going to be a means of reaching this gleeful nirvana, gleeful, exciting, again, some kind of paradise, moment of enlightenment, serenity, or happiness. Nirvana is used a lot in essays, especially when you want to talk about perhaps being happy or finally reaching some kind of good conclusion. Nirvana does tend to be used, and that's why we're discussing. The spa experience was a well-deserved week of pure nirvana, pure happiness, elation, tranquility, serenity, calmness. But something funny happened on the way to this digital nirvana. Digital nirvana, we're talking about this being perhaps a technological convention or some kind of heaven where there's a bunch of new electronics. Probably it's a convention of sorts. And so nirvana doesn't always have to be, let's say, very tranquil or serene. Most likely conventions don't tend to be that way anyway, but it's a digital nirvana, digital kind of heaven. For some, visiting the summer seasonal area in their favorite store is pure nirvana. Pure ecstasy, happiness, tranquility, serenity, the best thing they could ever experience. Sometimes that is the case for certain people or shoppers. And last but not least, we have the word nuance. At this point, I'm pretty sure you guys know what I mean when I say nuance because I've said it like maybe 40 times at this point. But the word nuance is a subtle distinction or variation. This is a noun, and we want to be looking more closely at this idea of subtlety. Very much under the nose, not really standing out, not glaring, not garish or gaudy, very much subtle. Okay, we don't really see it, we barely perceive it. Synonyms being shade, gradation, variation, subtlety, nicety, refinement, or overtone. Subtlety would be the best one. However, forget the rest of the synonyms. I give you these synonyms so you have a reference, but you don't need any of these. Just learn the word nuance and you're good. Nuance is that slight undertone, trying to explain something in a different manner, or if you're trying to wink, wink, nudge, nudge your friend into doing something, you might say a comment or a question with a little bit of nuance to help lead them on. Like, hey, want to go do that? Be a little bit subtle about it. The crew needed to use some nuance when they made choices for the cast's makeup, hair, and wardrobe selection. They needed to make a distinction, but not a very glaring or standout distinction. They needed to make it very minute, very carefully, so it was barely perceivable, but it was still there. Very nuanced. In a campaign that seems to grow more bitter, both are pushing realities short on nuance. So here, there is no subtlety. There is nothing subtle about their arguments going back and forth. It's just very straightforward that they don't like each other, and that is what kind of campaign these two parties are seeming to push. Others expressed a newfound nuance to their political approach. Here, again, maybe we're talking about politics, but this person is saying there is a new kind of subtlety. We want to go about this in a different manner, maybe a quieter, underhanded manner, maybe something that is simpler, something that doesn't stand out too much. He listened to the subtle nuances in the song and appreciated the track even more. Here, the word subtle is being used as an adjective towards this word nuance, being the word a noun. And so the subtle nuances, the careful, quiet comments that are being made in the song, and he ended up appreciating it even more because it was not a clear message. The message was hidden within the lyrics, and he was really listening for that. And with that, that is our final word, nuance, and I'm really glad I get to end it off here because this word is one of those words I was really looking forward to discussing with you guys. And with that, make sure you guys pronounce these words, write them out, and I will see you in the next video where we talk about another 10 words.